So guys, as promised, I'll be going over the rest of the PR9 stuff in this video. First things first, shout out to the lurkers who came out in support yesterday. I'm a huge lurker myself in a lot of other communities, so I understand the sentiment and I think it's very based to lurk. If you're a lurker watching this, drop a $5 donation on my Ko-fi page right now. Okay, but jokes aside, let's get on to the ships. First up, we have Valparaiso. She's quite a lot different from the typical UR battleship, not really boasting the high stats or raw damage output, but rather relies quite heavily on her secondary guns and has a ton of healing. You can think of her as a hybrid between Raffaello and Omi. Her secondary guns become activated typically 20 seconds into the fight, since it's difficult for them to fire 30 times before then with their normal range. Once activated and the range is set to 105, pretty much everything on the field should be within range. She has 188 reload when maxed out, so we can take another ship who has about the same amount of reload, for example Alsace, and we can see what the cooldown of her secondaries would be. I'm assuming that she would only take the new Rainbow 2127 because she changes the ammo mods of her secondaries, and this is by far the highest raw damage, whilst also retaining decently low cooldown. Plus, its biggest weakness of having low shell range is completely negated by her setting the range to 105. So here we have a cooldown of 1.14 seconds, and the volley time of this gun is 0.16 seconds, and firing the gun 3 times should add an absolute cooldown of 0.6 seconds, although that might not be entirely accurate. Putting it all together, we should expect to see her secondary gun fire 20 times every 15 seconds or so, meaning she'll heal herself every 15 seconds, and every 30 seconds she'll heal the lowest HP ship in the fleet by 8%. In most situations, you should probably expect to see the 8% heal once a battle, since you have to wait until 20 seconds before she actually starts consistently firing her gun, and then 30 seconds after that in order to reach the number of shots required. So probably around 50 seconds for the first heal. But when it gets to the late Chapter 16 stages, especially out of ammo, maybe it'll get triggered twice or even 3 times at most if the battles are dragging long enough. So her self-sustain will be quite good, but I wouldn't consider her a full-on healer, like Raffaello or Cowpens. Her cross-fleet healing is actually quite significant, healing your tank up to 25% every battle, so it might actually be better to use her in the boss fleet instead to heal up your mob fleet. In any case, she will definitely excel in a double mob fleet setup, where both of your fleets are used for multiple battles. Damage-wise, if you compare her to, say, Omi, her stats don't actually compare that favorably. She has slightly more firepower and reload, but Omi actually has 50% more efficiencies on her secondary guns. However, the other properties aside from raw damage more than compensates for the lower efficiency. So things like the higher shell speed, the ability to ignore shields, and better armor mods. The shell speed being set to 220 reduces misses on moving targets by a lot when using an HE gun that normally has only 150 speed. Ignoring shields is extremely important when it comes to campaign, and this specific property might completely trivialize those pesky suicide ships with the frontal shields in Chapter 14. And finally, most destroyer guns fall off a cliff damage-wise when not hitting light armor, which her special mods mitigate to a large extent. Putting it all together, while her stats are not that high, so you might think that her damage ceiling is lower than the likes of GBB or Lion, she's a lot more flexible and carries a ton of utility that should make her a mainstay in difficult campaign stages, and even in boss fights, should the enemy stay in place for long periods of time, the damage from her secondary guns could add up and prove to be enough to earn her a spot. Moving on, we have Takahashi. Being an IJN light cruiser with exceptional torpedoes and anti-air immediately draws comparisons to Shimanto, who is to this day a premier options for late game campaign stages. She actually compares quite favorably and wins out in a couple areas. First, she definitely has higher damage output, having the simultaneous torpedo reload just like Shimanto, but with a hefty torpedo crit buff as well as preloaded torpedoes, which Shimanto does not have. Next, her anti-air seems to be slightly better as well, having even higher efficiency on her anti-air gun, and a larger anti-air buff for the Vanguard fleet, not to mention +5 to your anti-air range, which currently only her and Moskva have. I would assume that these buffs stack and maybe potentially fast anti-air guns with smaller ranges might make a comeback, but then again, I checked the list of anti-air guns, and there aren't even really any fast guns that have really high DPS. Her survivability is similar to Shimanto's, having more bulk in terms of stats but lacking the 18% damage reduction that Shimanto has in her skills. Where she falls short in comparison to Shimanto is that she doesn't extinguish fires from the entire fleet, something unique to Shimanto and extremely relevant in late game campaign stages, where fires are the most threatening type of enemy damage, ignoring both damage reduction effects and evasion once applied. Also worth mentioning is that she fires a barrage every 15 seconds that slows by 40% for 6 seconds if only one enemy is hit, but unfortunately the timing is a little bit too fast to be reliable in boss fights, so it's not that important. If it was every 18 to 20 seconds, it will line up much better with the main fleet attacks. In mob fights, it'll likely hit more than one enemy and not even activate the slow. Overall, she's extremely capable where anti-air is needed, and will be a side grade over Shimanto, mostly an upgrade if fires are of no concern, which they often are. Next up is Duncan. She just seems okay. She has a lot of buffs from her first skill that increases her damage, and the barrage is also quite strong, but her firepower is really low, so the damage probably won't be all that impressive, and I don't think a measly 5% damage taken increase for HE only will be enough to give her relevancy. Her second skill is worse. It has minor damage reduction effects and then fires a slowing torpedo up to twice, but you can't really sync it up with anything since it activates when her HP drops below 50%, so it might as well just not exist. Yeah, it's pretty much just an okay gold battleship. And the last ship is Orage. Her stats are solid, but nothing in particular stands out. She only has one main gun mount, and her torpedo efficiency is quite mediocre, so her only saving grace is if her barrages do a lot of damage to compensate. At a glance, the numbers don't really look that impressive. And she also has 30% extra auxiliary stats instead of the all-out assault perk, no idea why, so I'm not too hopeful. Just like the other two PR ships in this batch, she also has a slow, but her slow is probably the most useful one, being a 5-second slow that activates on a 10-second interval, and having the ability to sync with most main fleet attacks. But a 30% slow alone is not going to be enough to make her relevant in bossing situations without being paired with impressive bulk or damage. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the new ships. Valparaiso and Takahashi seem quite promising, while Duncan and Orage probably won't be seeing much use from what I can tell. Let's now move on to the equipment. Aside from the skip bomber from yesterday, we got 2 new destroyer guns, 2 new torpedoes, and 1 new battleship gun. Starting with the destroyer guns, and starting with the French gun, it's an upgrade over the Tashkent gun against light armor, making it the best gold destroyer gun against light armor, but it is outclassed by the Italian SAP gun against medium armor, and outclassed by all of the rainbow guns. Actually, its performance against light armor is probably close to being on par with the Twin 100 Kai, due to having 10 more firepower and more range, but the Twin 100 is a bit faster. I consider this a solid piece of gold equipment. The other destroyer gun looks like it's meant to be used as a secondary, having lower DPS but higher range and total damage per salvo. Its interception capability doesn't seem to be as good as the Twin 137 though, due to having lower initial damage. And ships like Valparaiso and Omi set the range of their secondary guns with their skills, so the range part is irrelevant for them. They're better off just using stronger guns with less range. So this gun isn't really that amazing, but I guess if you're doing PR9 research, you'll just get a few copies eventually from going for other stuff. Then you can craft 1 or 2 to use as secondary guns for interception purposes. And while it seems to be worse than the Twin 137, you won't need to use your Operation Siren materials for this one, which could be beneficial to some people. Moving on, let's look at the torpedoes. First, the new IJN torps come to the top when you sort by DPS, but it's a bit of a bait. The reload makes the DPS value higher, but you're never getting an extra salvo with these over the Rainbow 610, so it's irrelevant. And with these torps, you're probably going to want to play on manual and hug the enemy when you fire them to maximize damage. In that case, the Rainbow 610 still does more total damage if you just do a quick calc of 235 times 4 compared to 190 times 5, not to mention the higher torpedo stat of the Rainbow torps. Still, they're barely weaker than the Rainbow 610, and you can save some plates and use these instead of upgrading the Rainbow 610 all the way to plus 13. The other torpedoes are French and have armor mods skewed toward light armor on top of being homing, unlike the previous ones that were introduced. So I think they'll be pretty good against light armor enemies, especially bosses, on auto. Total damage and DPS stats aside, the non-homing French torps would hit like 1 torp on average on auto, and if the homing property allows this to even hit 2 torps on average, that alone would be a significant upgrade and definitely worth considering over traditional magnetic torpedoes against specifically light armor. So ships like William D. Porter or Mogador might enjoy using it. Finally, the battleship gun is an ever so slight upgrade to the good old Purple 406 Mark VI. It has a slightly shorter cooldown and the damage is just slightly higher when accounting for the extra firepower it gives, so it's just a hair stronger even at plus 10, but as a piece of gold equipment it can be upgraded to plus 13, which gives it even more of an edge. It gets completely obliterated though by the line gun and 406 Mark VII, but it could be nice even for a player like me who has multiple Mark VIIs, just to keep one copy of this for its slightly lower cooldown for timing purposes. Alright, that about wraps it up for the gameplay related stuff. In terms of design, I actually like Imelmon the most by a good margin. To be honest, I haven't really been feeling a lot of the Iron Blood UR designs since like Bismarck Zwei. They've all been somewhere between decent and meh for me, but I really do like the hairstyle, hair color, and fluffy robe on Imelmon. That's why I'm not really as annoyed as I've seen some other people be at just how strong she is. I mean, there are UR designs that I like even more, like Alsace and Soyuz, and I would be really happy if they had turned out to be the strongest ships by a wide margin at the time of their release, but Imelmon is perfectly acceptable for me. Speaking of designs that I wouldn't mind being broken URs, lately I've been thinking Unryuu is extremely underrated. Like, the art is literally perfect, the water dragon motif is awesome, she's bare feet, not that it matters of course, and in my opinion, this is easily a top tier UR level design, but she came out in a mini event as an SSR. It's just such a waste, man. What were they thinking? Getting back on topic, Valparaiso's art looks good for sure, but it just doesn't really click with me. Maybe it will once she gets a good skin. Takahashi looks way too much like Mogador. It's probably the same artist since Mogador and Shimanto also share the same artist, but just the bangs and the shape of her chest is way too similar to Mogador for me, and that's all I can really think of. I like the pink color and the spider motif, but I just can't shake off the fact that this is just pink Mogador. And one last thing before I move on, she kinda looks like Mogador. Next, Orage is a bit plain, but I like her face. Short stacks aren't really my thing though, so. Finally, Duncan is just like, bruh. Look at the rigging, there's no background or anything. I'm gonna just compare this to Takahashi or Unryuu, for example. Plus, I don't really like the pose. Yeah, this is not really doing it for me. But yeah, that's pretty much it for PR9. Overall, we have a pretty good PR ship in Takahashi, and a lot of the gold equipment is also useful. But Duncan does drag the overall score down. Let me know what you think about the PR9 update. I'm expecting a lot of negative feelings, but I think it's alright aside from Duncan. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.